Hello,
Hello,
I'm Kimberly,
I'm Michael,
and welcome to Real Takes,
and Movie Breaks.
and welcome to our special segment known as Retro View, where we review films called Hidden Gems. Basically, films that are a little more obscure, that aren't necessarily super popular, and some older films, right?
Yeah, basically something that maybe people missed from back in the day, or just never saw, or maybe never had any real desire to revisit. We revisit them and talk about them instead of like doing them on a watch along or our typical style.
Yes, so today's hidden gem is Tin Man.
10 Men
Oh, Tin Men.
from 1987.
1987, Tin Men. I just saw this for the first time. I had no idea what I was getting into. You just said this would be a fun movie to watch for Retro View. And I have to say, I was so pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this film. So first we'll talk about what we liked, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we may not have liked, and then we'll share if we would recommend it and assess, does it still hold up today, this older film. So I really loved the chemistry between the two characters. I loved the writing. I thought the writing was so natural. And it felt natural because you have great actors delivering the lines. But I was also wondering if some of the lines are even improvised because it felt so natural. These characters felt like two real human beings. And it depicts these two main guys. They're both called Tin Men. They both sell aluminum siding. One of them runs into the other one in a car.
They sort of run into each other.
Yeah.
Like, because Danny DeVito's, he's like doing this, like, while he's driving, and then Dreyfuss is backing out.
Yeah.
Into oncoming traffic.
Yeah, so they're both sort
So
of
it's
at
never
fault.
We never know whose fault it is.
Yeah, it's very debatable whose fault it is, but they both get out of the car, blame each other.
And they're both aluminum siding salesmen.
Yeah.
They both have this very like gimmick sales job for improving the way the home looks, like on the exterior of the home.
Yeah.
It was big in the 60s. Anyway.
And it's set in the 60s. It was shot in the 87, I think.
Yeah, it was shot in 87. It's set in
the
like
60s.
1963.
And
they're both the same profession. They both have Cadillacs.
Yeah.
That's the important thing. They hit each other, and they both have Cadillacs, which is like that's the fancy car to show that they're snazzy. Mm-hmm. They're both hustlers.
Yeah, they're both kind of sleazy salesmen. Like they aren't 100% honest with their clients, and it shows how they sort of manipulate their clients in a funny way.
Yep.
But then they both get in trouble for it later.
And also the opening scene is funny because you probably missed this watching it that first time, but Dreyfuss is getting sold a Cadillac, and he's being sold. He's dealing with a salesman.
Yeah, a salesman dealing with a salesman.
And so at the beginning, he's like, "All right, stop giving me a hustle number." He's like, "Well, how much do you want to pay?" He's like, $4. I want to pay $4 a month. Well, that's not an honest answer. What do you want to hear? I want to pay nothing. Like that's his first little bit. And then they hit each other. They get out of the car.
And they start yelling at each other.
They hate each other.
And it's so funny to see these two characters get so angry and worked up over something so petty. And I think that's why it's funny, is because they take this petty drama so seriously. And that's why it's funny. And they play it off so well and so sincerely. And it's just tit for tat, and they're trying.
Let me get this.
They're just trying to go after each other and get even with each other. So Richard Dreyfuss's character, like, finds out where Danny DeVito's wife's character is. I can't remember their character names, but she's in the grocery store.
Her name is Nora.
Nora, that's right.
And Dreyfuss's name is BB.
BB, okay.
Bill Babowski.
Okay.
And then Danny DeVito's character's name is Tilly.
Okay, Tilly, that's right. So BB goes to Tilly's wife, pretends like he just bumps into her at the grocery store, and then,
can I get some help around here?
Yeah.
And then she's
like, oh.
He's like, do you know about these TV dinners? Are they any good? And she's like, oh no.
And she's like, oh, why don't you make a chicken? And then he says what? oh, I
But then
just got
you gotta sit and watch it cook.
But and he just said he just got
my wife.
divorced.
He goes, my wife just died.
Yeah, he makes up some story
then,
to get sympathy, and she's like, "Oh, well, maybe you should, you know."
You try to cook a chicken. He's like, well, you got to sit and watch it cook. Seems so sad.
And it's just the dialogue. You can tell she's sort of putty in his hand, and he's just trying to seduce her, and it works because she's clearly not happy with Tilly. There's a whole scene where she's massaging him in the bathtub.
Oh, I love that scene where he's talking about a picnic.
And it's so funny because this sounds like a realistic dialogue with like an old married couple. He's like, will you massage my head? And she's massaging his head while he's in the bathtub. And she's like, how come we never do anything fun?
And he's like, we do lots of fun stuff together. We sit in front of the TV all the time. And then she's like,
why don't we go on a picnic? That would be fun.
And he goes, I don't understand a picnic. I mean, ants get in the food. There's bees. You got to drive. It takes like an hour to get there. And what do? You sit in the grass and eat. It's much more fun eating in front of the TV.
And what's funny is like he's so sincere and he kind of has a point, but she's just trying to have fun and ignite the spark and do something different. You know, connect with
It's just that one scene you realize.
You realize they've
nothing.
lost touch. You know, their marriage is sort of gone flat.
She gets up and walks away. He's like, what'd I say?
Yeah. So you realize they've lost their spark, and so she can't resist the advances.
And also, what's also funny is Dreyfuss in this movie is like, he's got the slicked back, like his hair is kind of like, he's got the gray fox look.
Yeah.
He's all in the snazzy suits.
Yeah.
He's very slick. And Danny DeVito is short and fat and kind of pitiful, and he has money problems.
Yeah.
And he's just angry about everything. Mm-hmm. So obviously she's gonna go for Dreyfuss is peak movie star at this point. But they're both kind of the same character. They're both a lot more similar. And they don't really. And that's who she falls for. She still falls for
another
guy,
not knowing he's a 10-man.
And that's what's also funny is he's tricking her to sleep with him. I love that scene when he sleeps with her, and then he calls
Tilly, and BB's like, "Hey, I just poked your wife." And then what does Tilly say?
He's like, well,
great,
keep her.
She's a thorn in my side or something like that. You keep her. I'm happier
She's
without
an albatross around my neck.
Yeah.
And you both rot in hell. And he slings up the phone. And then it cuts to Dreyfuss, and Dreyfuss is like, is this a setup?
Yeah,
he set me up.
Because BB's disappointed because he's like, oh, I'm gonna get him now, and then Tilly like subverts his expectations. Oh, well, you did me a favor, so now it's like, well, how do I get back at him now? And then it cuts to like Tilly like throwing all of his wife's clothes out of the house, kicking her out.
I love that scene where he throws everything out.
Yeah, and he's just like literally like throwing all this. The way he's doing it's really funny.
This director, his name is Barry Levinson. I wish he had been able to make more movies. I suspect that people. One of the reasons this movie isn't as famous as I think it should be is people kind of perceive it as maybe a little bit boring or a little bit dry. It's not though. It's actually it's got some very rich stuff. Like Danny DeVito has great physical comedy. Richard Dreyfuss is just very it's very smart sort of humor.
And the comedy doesn't come from. It's not like
it's not like a
Jim Carrey slapstick. No. The comedy comes from.
It's very smart.
The characters being very sincere about this drama, and fully committing to their pettiness.
Yeah, totally committed.
And what makes it funny to me is that they're so petty, but they're so passionate. There's a really funny scene that I really loved. And this is what makes the writing so brilliant and the acting so brilliant. So it's funny because like BB is sitting with a guy and he's like, seriously, like how do I deal with this woman?
Because he's never lived with a woman.
He's never lived with a woman before, and he's like, man, she is sleeping on my side of the bed.
She slept on my side of the bed.
She's rearranging my stuff. And it's like the end of the world to him. And he's like, I have to break up with her. So he goes to her. Yeah. He goes to her work, and he's so sincere. And he's like.
But remember, she's very she kind of fixes her hair when she sees him.
Yeah, and he's like, but it's so serious. And it's so serious to him. These petty problems are so serious to him. And he's like, I have to talk to you about something. You were sleeping on my side of the bed, and that's a problem, and this isn't going to work. And she was like, well, why didn't you just tell me to move over? And then he's like, I didn't want to wake you up. And then she's like, well, you could have just nudged me a little bit. And then he realizes how silly and petty he's being, and he's like, oh, yeah. And then he starts to actually fall for her. And then it becomes this, like, surprisingly touching romance, which I was delightfully surprised at, because he actually falls for her. So now he's trying to legitimately win her over, and then Tilly tells his wife, by the way, that guy's, I'm happy for you. You know, it's just kind of funny that you fell for another Tin Man. And she's like, what? He's a Tin Man?
She realizes that he's the guy and that he was only getting with her because he wanted to get back at him. So then she runs into his car and screams at him and leaves.
She runs into his car.
So then he goes looking for it. So he goes to Tilly's house, but it's just Tilly there. He's like on the toilet.
Yeah.
But Dreyfuss is drunk.
BB is drunk because he's like all distraught because he actually liked the girl and he realizes he really liked her.
There's also a running gag throughout the movie. Tilly's friends know BB as this guy who dances at the club, and the one guy's like, I'm telling you, he dances the merengue. He does it better than anyone. And then Tilly's like, well, I'll tell you something, if Mr. Merengue wants to play. So he always calls him Mr. Merengue. Yeah. So he's sitting on the toilet and he hears the trash cans like fall over. Yeah. And he looks out the window and it's Richard Dreyfuss
drunk.
And then Tilly's like,
but he comes there to try to talk to the wife.
He's just coming there to talk to the wife.
To try to explain that yes, it started out one way, but then he did develop genuine feelings.
But Tilly thinks he's coming for him, so he's like, Mr. Merengue's coming for me. So he turns out all the lights, and he gets a gun, and he kind of opens the door to like to lure him in. Yeah. And he's like, come on, and he knocks on the door like he's not trying to break in. He's knocking on the door. And he's like, hello.
He's clearly not trying to break in.
He's like, hello. He just kind of pokes his head in like, hello, and then immediately he hits him over the head and knocks him out. And then he wakes up, and then
Tilly is
he's throwing eggs.
You come to rob me? And BB's like, what? I didn't come to rob you. You came to rob me?
He has a concussion, and then he pulls the gun out, and he's like, I'm going to humiliate you.
And then he starts throwing eggs at us. There's this most childish, like they're acting like schoolboys with this childish, like, I'm going to get you back. I'm going to get you back.
And then he gets charged with assault.
Because he's throwing eggs at him.
And then it's like, is Richard Dreyfuss going to drop the charges or whatever? But all while this is happening, there's a B plot, which is... They sell aluminum siding, but they run all these scams to try to get people to buy their crap.
Yeah, they're scammy.
And so they tell people like, oh, you'll be in Life magazine, or I'm going to give you a kickback if someone else buys from us in the neighborhood because they're going to see your house and they're going to love it. So they have all these scams, and then there's a commission that's basically investigating them, and they're going to basically destroy their whole industry. Mm-hmm. And so they're trying to get out of that commission hearings or whatever.
And then there's this really romantic scene where BB finds the girl and she's rightfully justified
in the rain
and being very angry at him. But it's this cute little romantic scene where he approaches her in the rain and he's like, you're right, okay, I was just stupid. It was a despicable thing I did to try to just get back at him, but I fell in love with you. I want to be with you. I want to marry you. Well, it's like really sincere and really sweet.
He has a good line there. He says, I never would have met you otherwise.
Yeah.
And then that stops her.
Yeah.
And then he's able to have his little moment where he's like, I want to... like he's like, I want to marry you.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's very sincere. He's not being a salesman. He's very honest in that moment.
And then you see, like, he's more than just a sleazy salesman. And you start to... Both characters, you slowly start to realize there's more to them than just these sleazy salesmen. And you start to like them more and more. Yeah. Even though they're not very likable at the beginning, you kind of start to like them a little more and more. They become a little better people through their silly little war against each other.
That scene in the rain was being filmed the day I was born.
Oh, that's right. That's why you wanted to show me
That's
the movie.
the scene
in Baltimore.
As my mom was being driven to the hospital, they were filming. She saw Richard Dreyfuss outside in that hat and the raincoat or whatever.
Aww.
So it was kind of a little aside. But anyway, after all that happens, they're back together. But then Richard Dreyfuss wants to get Tilly to agree to the divorce, right? Mm-hmm. And then they have to shoot pool for it.
They decide, I'll challenge you to pool.
And I like that whole scene afterwards where he's talking to her and he's like, well, we decided to shoot pool over it. And she's like, what do you mean you decided to shoot pool over my life or whatever? Yeah. And he's like, well, I lost. And she's like, well, what does this mean? And he's like, well, I have to honor the agreement, but I'm not very honorable.
Not very honorable.
And so then we go to the commission hearings. There's another little subplot with a guy who's actually like a mole who's trying to be a salesman, but he's actually working for the commission. He gets some files, but Dreyfuss gives it up because he's done with that business. He's changed. He's changed. So he no longer
he's ready to give it up. He wants she's a genuine, caring person, and he wants to be a better person for her.
But Tilly, on the other hand, wants to continue being a salesman, but he can't do it. He can't cut it anymore. It's not working. And it's also it's a yin and yang, the two characters, because Tilly's like he's like the dinosaur. He's an extinct type of sale. Like you can't do door to door scams anymore. Yeah. And it just isn't working. He can't get any sales. His partner sells him out to the commission. He's like, I'm gonna just go ahead and give him up because he sucks now. And so Tilly's like, wow, how can you do this to me? And then at the end, they're both there at the commission.
Both there at the same place at the commission.
But BB's like, I gave him evidence. I'm out of this. He's the only way I could get out of this business. And they're kind of joking. And then Tilly's like trying to argue his way out of it, but they're like, well, just give him your license on your way out. And so he's done.
So they both lose their license.
I mean, I love that little moment where Dreyfuss kind of tosses his license on the table.
They both lose their license, and then BB walks out. Tilly's leaning up against his car, and they both realize that they're in the same spot. They both just lost their license, and before they both lose their license, Tilly asks him, how's Nora? And BB says, good, and he's like, you take good care of her. And they have this sort of unspoken, like, peace between them, which is really interesting. And so then BB offers Tilly a ride because he doesn't have a car, and then they see a car, right? And they see
the Volkswagen Beetle.
Yeah,
and I think it insinuates Dreyfuss will start selling those.
Yeah, and it implies they both say, I have an idea.
Oh, what's your idea? I want to hear yours first.
And it sort of implies that maybe they're about to do business together. And so, you see these characters that are not very likable. They're very similar, so they hate each other. And through their hatred, they start discovering they're better people underneath all that. And they can be better people underneath all that. And they make peace at the end. And it's just the way it comes around to me. It gave me warm, fuzzy feelings. And not a lot of modern movies do that in an effective way. So I loved this film because it was so different from modern movies in that way. And they felt like real, fully developed guys. So it didn't have like a happily ever after fairy tale ending. It felt like this could really happen. You know, these two guys could make peace with each other. And I don't know, I really, really liked it for that aspect.
And on top of all of this, there's a lot of funny scenes interspersed throughout the movie. There's a lot of like stuff in there that's like just hilarious. Like all the nightclub stuff is funny when they're together, and it's the Fine Young Cannibals that are always the nightclub act, which is the She Drives Me Crazy band. Yeah, but they're singing that song, "Good Thing, Where Have You Gone?" Yeah, so they're singing that all the time. And then there's sort of this the friendship with the Tilly and his partner, and then he goes to finds God at the smorgasbord scene. The whole scene when they're going to make a truce, and he's got egg all over him, and
yeah,
then they can't.
And they're in the diner,
and then they're arguing over what they're ordering.
Yeah,
and then Dreyfuss gets so enraged in that scene. Remember that
Yeah.
moment where he's like,
they're so funny because they allow themselves to drive each other crazy, and it just seems like they're having fun driving each other crazy.
Oh yeah.
Like they're having fun driving each other crazy, and they're having fun losing their minds in this
You can kind of see. Remember in What About Bob? How Richard Dreyfuss goes absolutely crazy.
Yeah,
you can see him.
He sees a little of that.
There's a little bit of that in this. It's not. It's different. Like, but when he gets mad at Danny DeVito when he's like that, Danny DeVito's like, "Whoa, let's get the men with the straitjackets."
Yeah,
This guy's out of control. Like they're both just eggy. They're both. Trying to get the other one, and it's so much fun, and it just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of great actors, side actors. The partner of Dreyfuss that gets the heart attack is great.
Yeah.
The woman Barbara Hershey is great. There's so many good actors.
Every actor was great. I wish they still made movies like this.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, it's very simple, but it's done so effectively, and I can't think of a movie quite like this.
Yeah.
So
this era, so from at some point in the mid '80s up until you actually saw there was a string of movies that were inspired by that era. Mm-hmm. So like if you take 10 Men, right? So then a few years later, we see Shawshank Redemption, and that's a movie in the '90s, but it's really about like the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
You know, with this friendship with these guys in prison and stuff, and we're harkening back to that era, or like Forrest Gump goes back into that era, or like Mr. Holland's Opus goes back into that era, and we saw that for like a stretch, and then they kind of stopped making those movies.
Yeah, I think it still holds up today. I would recommend going to see it. On a scale of 1 to 5, I give it like 4.5. Only reason I wouldn't give it a 5 is just I didn't feel like inspired or changed profoundly, but I definitely felt some warm fuzzy feelings, and it I like that it had a happy ending. So yeah, I would definitely recommend watching it if you haven't seen it.
4.5.
Yeah,
I give it 4.5. Yeah.
So comment below if you've seen this movie, if you agree with us, if you disagree with us, and let us know if there are any other films you would like us to review for our retro view. Timeless classics and hidden gems. Stay real.
And have good days.